Welcome to RIDE's Common Review Findings in the Summer Food Service Program. During this training, we will review the most common findings that have been noted in previous SFSP program reviews and suggestions that you can take to prevent these findings in the future. The objective of this training is to assist sponsors in operating the SFSP successfully by identifying specific situations from previous reviews conducted by RIDE. Our goal is to help sponsors comply with program requirements so that they are able to receive full reimbursement for eligible expenses. We will discuss the most common findings found in each of the following sections and any steps to take to prevent these issues from occurring again. The SFSP is a federally funded program in which tax dollars are used to support nutritious meals fed to children throughout the state. It is important that sponsors maintain program integrity by adhering to program regulations. There are several steps that a sponsor can take to prevent review findings, but as a brief overview, those steps include scheduling time to maintain and organize paperwork. The SFSP can sometimes be document heavy, and oftentimes if paperwork is not organized and documents are missing, findings can occur. So it is important that throughout the summer, all of the relevant paperwork that would be used to support your claim for reimbursement is easily accessible and organized. Often, RIDE will find that not all staff members at the organization have received the proper training. The sponsor should have a process in place to document the staff members that have received training and those who still require the training. There are occasions where new staff are hired or seasoned staff need a refresher, so the sponsor should also have the resources to be able to train or retrain staff if necessary. The training that RIDE provides is an overview of the requirements of the SFSP. The sponsor should develop their own policies and procedures regarding their SFSP operations to meet program requirements. These policies and procedures should be implemented in the sponsor's SFSP operations and included in their annual training. Sponsors should most importantly conduct edit checks on source documentation used to support the meals claimed for reimbursement to ensure that they are complete and accurate. These edit checks should include a two-person system, where one person checks all relevant information and enters the claim for reimbursement, and a second person verifies all information is correct before submitting the claim. Meal counts should be checked that they are filled out correctly and completely, that the number of meals delivered matches the number of meals that were on the delivery slip, and that leftover meals were recorded correctly. Delivery slips should contain all pertinent information, including the address of the delivery site, the amount of each item delivered, including the required portion size, and individual menu items, as well as the meal period that the meal was intended for, and a signature from both the vendor and the site staff. Lastly, the sponsor should establish an adequate financial management system. For non-SFAs only, a separate account should be maintained for SFSP funds. All documentation to support SFSP expenses outlined in the approved budget should be maintained, such as vendor invoices, paper receipts, payroll records, utilities, etc. The sponsor should reconcile their nonprofit SFSP account regularly and ensure that revenue and expenses are being adequately tracked. We will start with civil rights. Civil rights is an extremely important aspect to the SFSP, and sponsors must ensure that all people have the opportunity to participate in the summer food service program, and that no participant is discriminated against because of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability. During reviews, it has been noted that sponsors are not training all staff involved in the SFSP on civil rights, or they are training staff members but are not maintaining documentation on the training, including dates of training or names and signatures of the attendees. It has also been noted that sponsors have advertised the program and/or provided materials to the public that mention the benefits of the SFSP, but failed to include the non-discrimination statement, or used the shortened statement without receiving prior approval from RIDE before doing so. There have been certain instances where the sponsor did not complete the annual beneficiary data form at all, or if they did, it either wasn't filled out for all sites or completed correctly. In a memo released in May 2021, sponsors are no longer able to use visual identification when completing the annual beneficiary data form. However, it was found during reviews that sponsors were still using visual identification and including language regarding visual identification in their trainings. In order to prevent civil rights findings, there are several steps the sponsor can take to ensure that compliance with civil rights requirements are met. The sponsor must ensure that civil rights training is conducted at least once annually before program operations begin. Both site staff as well as administrative staff involved in the operation of the SFSP must be trained on civil rights. Oftentimes, sponsors will email training for staff members to review in their own time, so having a method to document which staff members have completed the training, such as an Excel spreadsheet, is key. Documentation must also be maintained that includes the date on which the training occurred, the name of attendees, as well as the signatures of the attendees. The full non-discrimination statement needs to be included on all materials that mention the program and its benefits. If the sponsor wishes to use the shortened statement, the sponsor must first receive approval from RIDE before doing so. The most current version of the non-discrimination statement is included in the Download Forms section of CNP Connect. One way to ensure that the annual beneficiary data form gets completed each year is to complete the form along with the full or fourth week monitoring visit. This way, the sponsor can keep track by knowing that if all the sites have been monitored, then all of the data forms have also been completed. Since sponsors are no longer allowed to use visual identification to complete the annual beneficiary data form, the sponsor must establish methodology for the required collection of the data that must be included on the form. RIDE recommends using alternative sources of data to obtain the information, such as census data, school data, or meal benefit application data. There have been several findings related to monitoring that have been noted, including not conducting the full site review within the first 4 weeks of operation, not requesting a waiver for the first week monitoring visit and failing to complete that monitoring visit. The sponsor completed the monitoring form but left certain areas of the form blank or did not conduct certain validation activities, such as verifying if all staff members at the site have been trained. Lastly, the sponsor noted issues observed during the monitoring visit. However, these findings were never addressed or followed up on. For example, meals that were not compliant were served, however, no meals were disallowed, or meals were served outside of the approved window, and the sponsor's application was never updated with a window that would encompass all groups eating. Sponsors must ensure that all monitoring requirements are met. At a minimum, sponsors must complete the following monitoring requirements. Pre-operational visits. Sponsors should visit all new sites and sites that have had issues in previous years before they begin operations. These visits are required to make sure that the sites have facilities to provide meal services for the number of children expected to attend. First week site visits. As part of the final integrity rule for FY23, first week site visits will only be required for new sites or sites that had operational deficiencies in the previous year. Fourth week site review. Sponsors must review all sites at least once during the first 4 weeks of program operations. After this initial period, sponsors must conduct a reasonable level of monitoring. If a site operates less than 4 weeks, the sponsor must still conduct a review. All visits and reviews must be documented. Records of visits and reviews will help sponsors assess the operation of sites. The sponsor will need to develop and implement a procedure for site monitoring. The procedure needs to include an SFSP schedule that states when site visits and reviews will be completed and a system for handling monitor reports that will ensure that monitors return reports frequently. The reports should be immediately reviewed by the sponsor's staff person who is responsible for following up on any problems. In the procedure, include the staff responsible for reviewing the reports, that the reports will be reviewed for quality, and how additional training will be provided if monitors do not complete the monitor reports adequately. In addition, you will need to include which staff will be responsible for following up on any problems identified during site visits or reviews. In some cases, we see that all the monitoring has been completed for all sites, and the sponsor didn't indicate any problems, but when RIDE conducts a site visit, issues are noted. In other cases, the monitor notes that there were problems, but no required corrective action was issued for the site, and/or no follow-up review was conducted. We also see cases where the monitor records the meal that was observed, but that meal doesn't include all of the required components, and the meals are still claimed for reimbursement. Further, the sponsor needs to train the site monitors on how to properly conduct the visits and reviews and the use of the reports, and maintain documentation of this training. Failure to adequately train site and administrative staff can have significant impact on your summer food service program. Not training staff in general could lead to a finding, but more importantly, training is an essential part of making certain that staff know what they are required to do in the program. Lack of training could lead to staff members not fulfilling critical elements of the SFSP, which, depending on what types of errors are made, could lead a sponsor to face a substantial financial impact. Some findings related to training include the sponsor conducting annual training but failing to include certain information in the training documentation, such as the agenda with topics covered, the date on which the training occurred, names and signatures with associated sites. The sponsor not training all staff members prior to the start of the program. The sponsor trained site staff but failed to train the monitor on the proper monitoring procedures, or failed to separately train administrative staff involved in the operation of the SFSP. The sponsor watched the trainings that were provided by RIDE, however, did not train staff members on their own SFSP policies as they pertain to their own organization. It is the sponsor's duty to assure that all staff members involved in the SFSP have been appropriately trained for their duties before each summer season. The date of training, name and signatures of all attendees, and documentation of the training that is covered should be maintained for each SFSP year for a minimum of 3 years plus the current year. While reviewing a program, we will make sure that sign-in sheets contain names for staff members at each site. So if you have multiple sites, it is sometimes easier to have an additional column for the staff to write down which site they are associated with. Sometimes the date of the training might not be convenient for some staff, so the sponsor should have a process in place if not everyone is able to attend the training. RIDE accepts trainings that are done electronically. However, the sponsor must have a system in place to be able to track which staff members took the training. This could include a confirmation email, or if the sponsor chooses to use Google Forms, this Google document will track who has reviewed the documents. The sponsor should develop and implement a plan to ensure that all administrative staff involved in the SFSP, no matter their role, and monitors are trained on the appropriate procedures before undertaking any responsibilities. In some instances, RIDE has found that if a sponsor staff member has only one role in SFSP, such as that of the monitor, that person's training can be put on hold. The sponsor must ensure that, no matter how many or how few roles a staff member has in the SFSP, all staff members are fully trained in their respective duties before the start of the program. Each sponsor's program is unique to them in the number and type of sites that they operate. It is important to remember that the annual training that RIDE provides is an overview of SFSP regulations. Sponsors training for their staff can use RIDE training as a guideline, but their training needs to include their own policies and procedures for operating the SFSP. For example, RIDE training states regulation that sponsors must keep documentation of meal counts in order to submit a claim for reimbursement. The sponsor training should then go further and have policies and procedures that describe how the sponsor wants staff to manage this process, such as who fills out meal count sheets and how do they do that? How often are meal count sheets collected? Who in the organization is responsible for entering meal counts or double checking meal counts? Who submits the claims? Where is documentation stored, etc. Having policies and procedures in place ensures that staff know what needs done and how to do it. Program documentation findings can often carry the most significant financial impacts on program reviews. During a program review, RIDE will follow the flow of documents, and in order to do this, all of the following source program documents must be completed in a clear way which shows that meals claimed for reimbursement were accurate and that meals transferred to the claim for reimbursement were consolidated correctly. If there is no source documentation, RIDE cannot verify that certain activities happened. Source documentation that RIDE will use to verify meals claimed for reimbursement include meal count sheets, delivery slips and production records including any substitutions to the planned menu, daily dated menus for all meal periods claimed for reimbursement, including hot and cold meal menus, invoices and receipts, attendance records, and/or sign-in, sign-out sheets for closed enrolled sites. The following program documentation findings are related to sponsors taking accurate meal counts during service and submitting those meal counts for reimbursement. Common findings include the sponsor claiming more meals than the number of participants in attendance. This applies only to closed enrolled sites. The sponsor had meal count sheets that were missing, or if meal count sheets were present, they were often incomplete or inaccurate and did not match other source documentation, such as delivery slips or production records. The sponsor consolidated and transferred meal counts to the claim for reimbursement incorrectly. The sponsor was observed not taking point-of-service meal counts. RIDE will often suggest that sponsors implement a simple edit check process to ensure the information that supports the claim for reimbursement is true and accurate. This can include a two-person edit check for meal counts and attendance, where one person tallies up both and enters them into the claim for reimbursement, while a second person verifies that the numbers are correct. Before a claim is submitted for reimbursement, someone verifies and confirms that source documentation, such as delivery slips, production records, menus, are complete and accurate for all days of the month of submission. Edit checks can help a sponsor to identify areas of concern regarding meal counts and to determine next steps to correct any issues. If through the edit check process, the sponsor notes that there are certain areas of concern, such as meal count sheets being filled out incorrectly, non-compliant meals being served, delivery slips missing, or during meal observation it's noted that point-of-service meal counts aren't being taken, the sponsor should retrain applicable staff members on these issues in order to eliminate issues that could impose a fiscal impact. Each meal count sheet that is completed for each meal should be filled out in its entirety. The number of meals that were delivered or prepared, the number of leftover meals available, the number of meals transferred from another site, and the total of first, second, and adult meals should be clearly indicated on the meal count sheet. This way, RIDE staff will be able to follow the trail of meals throughout the month. Additionally, you should ensure that meals claimed do not exceed the number of meals that are available for service. If you find that there are consistently a large number of leftovers, adjustments should be made to the number of meals ordered. Failure to adequately adjust the number of ordered meals may result in a finding. Make sure that all staff who take meal counts know what a reimbursable meal consists of, so that non-compliant meals are not included in the claim for reimbursement. A non-compliant meal should be marked as such on the meal count sheet and not marked as a reimbursable meal under first meals served to children. All meal counts must be taken at the point of service, that is, when a reimbursable meal is served to an individual child. Counting leftovers or other methods of counting the number of meals served after the meal service is over is not an acceptable method of counting reimbursable meals given to children. The sponsor must ensure that their staff understand this and that their meal service is set up in such a way so that staff can take point-of-service meal counts. When sponsors don't fill out daily meal count sheets correctly, this could have a significant fiscal impact on the sponsor. When RIDE reviews meal count sheets for the month of review, we will go day by day and track the meals that were on hand, served, leftover, etc. If we are unable to follow any of the day's meals count sheets and are unable to verify that there were leftover meals, then there is a chance that RIDE will disallow the excess meals that were served. The meals that are claimed during each meal period each day should never exceed the number of meals that were available during any given meal period. In addition, when meal count sheets indicate that there are consistently an excess of meals available, it shows RIDE that there is not a system in place to adequately adjust the number of meals that are being served to fulfill the purpose of the program, to provide one meal to each child. The sponsor's application should accurately reflect what is occurring at each site. If changes are made, they should be updated in the sponsor's application and resubmitted to RIDE. The second section of program documentation findings revolves around meal pattern compliance. Complete and accurate meal pattern documentation, including menus, delivery slips, and production records with substitutions noted, are important because they are considered source documentation for the claim for reimbursement. Common findings include sponsors not maintaining a daily dated menu with serving sizes listed of each component, the sponsor not maintaining production records, or if they were not completed with enough information. The sponsor was not maintaining delivery slips, or if they were missing a few days. The sponsor had a planned menu and had made some substitutions throughout the month, but failed to record those substitutions anywhere. The sponsor should develop a plan and train staff on the accurate way to record substitutions so that it is consistent between classrooms and/or across multiple sites. Substitutions should be recorded on the planned menu, or in a way that is easily identifiable and most convenient for the sponsor, such as on the production records or delivery slips. When writing substitutions on a menu, the item that isn't being served should be crossed out, and the item that is being substituted should be written in. Delivery slips are an extremely important component of record keeping in the SFSP. When RIDE conducts a program review, we will review each day's delivery slip. These delivery slips show that meals were actually delivered and how many meals were delivered on any given day. RIDE will then compare the number of meals that were delivered to the number of meals that were claimed for reimbursement. Delivery slips also allow the sponsor to track how many excess meals there were. This allows the sponsor to adjust the meal order so that leftover meals are kept to a minimum. Lastly, delivery slips allow the sponsor, as well as RIDE, to verify that the meal pattern is being met. As the sponsor, it is your responsibility to verify that all items were received and also that the meal pattern is being met. If you are a sponsor receiving meals from a vendor, it is your duty to make sure that delivery slips are maintained for each serving day. If there is a day where a delivery slip was not received, you can write down on a separate piece of paper what items were delivered, including the date, and maintain this with other delivery slips. The sponsor should also be verifying that the meal components are listed with their respective serving sizes and that those meals meet meal pattern requirements. it is the sponsor's responsibility to reach out to the vendor if incorrect components are listed on the delivery slip, or if items are missing or damaged for that meal. The sponsor also should be using these delivery slips to frequently adjust meal counts to minimize the number of leftovers every day. As a reminder, delivery slips are required anytime meals are prepared at a central location and delivered to a site. If a site prepares their own meals, we do not require formal production records, but we should be able to determine based on the documentation saved not only what food items were served, but how many meals were prepared in total. This provides a check and balance of sorts. For example, the central kitchen noted on the delivery slip that they packed and delivered 100 meals, but how many meals did the site supervisor actually validate upon delivery? The actual number of meals received has an impact on the total number of meals available on any given day. Supervisors should be checking meals in and documenting any discrepancies in the number of meals delivered. Daily dated menus should be maintained for all meal periods and all meal types, including hot and cold meals. These menus should be provided to all sites that are participating in the SFSP and should be maintained on file for all months that the sponsor operates. Although procurement has been a relatively new area of SFSP that RIDE has been focusing on, the following are examples of issues that could lead to a finding. The sponsor did not have any procurement procedures in place, or the sponsor did have procurement procedures in place, but they were missing specific required information. The sponsor did not maintain the proper documentation from their most recent time going out to bid, including not maintaining specifications used, quotes received, and any other relevant communication. At a minimum, regulations require that sponsors participating in any of the child nutrition programs conduct procurements in line with federal procurement requirements and in a manner that promotes full and open competition. Develop and maintain a written standard or code of conduct that covers conflict of interest, including organizational conflicts of interest, and governs the performance of employees engaged in the selection, award, and administration of contract. Develop and maintain written procurement procedures to avoid the acquisition of unnecessary or duplicative items. The above items should be included in the sponsor's procurement plan. As a reminder, procurement procedures do not have to be CNP specific, and a RIDE procurement plan template is posted in the download form section in CNP Connect. Sponsors wishing to use a vendor must request quotes from a minimum of 3 different vendors and must award the contract to the most responsive and responsible vendor with the lowest price quote and maintain this documentation on file. You may recall that during a program review, RIDE will provide a list of the items that you can expect us to review while on site. These items include a menu for the month that we are reviewing and any invoices or receipts that validate food items that were purchased during the review month. RIDE will go through any receipts or invoices and validate that any items that are listed on the menu were purchased during the month, and vice versa, that any items indicated on the invoices were served during the month. Any items listed on the invoices that were not included on the menu will not count as a reimbursable food item. This could be an issue in an instance where a sponsor was reimbursed $1,000 during the review month, but based on invoices and menus with no marked substitutions, RIDE was only able to validate that $500 was purchased on actual reimbursable menu items, when food was the only allowable expense. What happened to the other $500, and how would we know that it was used to purchase reimbursable items? Certain instances like this could have a financial impact on the sponsor. In addition to this, RIDE may also be unable to validate that meals served met meal component requirements and were in fact reimbursable. When items on the menu aren't found on receipts or invoices, RIDE cannot verify that meals contained all required components to be claimed for reimbursement. Some sponsors were not reconciling their nonprofit SFSP food service accounts, nor did they have procedures in place to track income and expenses specific to the SFSP. They did not realize that some non-allowable items were being charged to the program. Others did not realize that they were billed incorrectly by the vendor, based on either the number of meals delivered and/or the contractually agreed upon price. RIDE relies on milk purchases to determine if the number of meals claimed is supported. Some sponsors did not have adequate records of milk purchases to support their meal claim. The process of reconciliation allows the sponsor to identify issues in program operations and resolve them early in the program. The process includes verifying that the number of meals claimed for reimbursement can be supported by documentation, including delivery slips, meal count sheets, menus, invoices, attendance records for closed enrolled sites, etc. Sponsors must be able to demonstrate that SFSP funds were spent only on allowable expenses, and they also must be able to show whether the program ran at a profit or loss. While sponsors do not need to keep separate bank accounts for SFSP, they must be able to identify all line items related to the program so that reviewers can validate that the SFSP operated on a nonprofit basis. Since reimbursement is based on meals that meet SFSP meal pattern requirements, it is critical that all staff involved with preparing and counting meals understand what the meal pattern requirements are for a reimbursable meal and that all components are offered to every participant. Food safety is a requirement and critical element in all child nutrition programs, including the SFSP. RIDE must immediately suspend or terminate a site if the health or safety of participating children is imminently threatened. All sponsors are responsible for ensuring that safe, healthy meals are served to participants. They must have food safety protocols in place and train staff on these protocols. The following slides describe food safety findings that RIDE has noted during site visits and reviews. Some of the food safety findings from last summer involve not maintaining temperature logs for holding units, such as refrigerators and warmers, and not temping meals when they were delivered or before service. Sponsors must keep food at safe holding temperatures, especially when meals are delivered several hours before service or when meals are taken on a field trip that does not have refrigeration available. On review, RIDE found a sponsor had delivered meals hours before a service, no temperature logs recorded, and the meals were left at room temperature with no ice packs. Another sponsor took temperature-sensitive meals on a field trip to a location with no refrigeration and did not include ice packs in coolers or record food temperatures. Sponsors must maintain daily temperature logs on any holding units used to store food for the SFSP. Food safety is the #1 priority in the SFSP and must be strictly adhered to. If food is being held for any length of time, the proper heating and cooling units should be utilized. Food should be temped upon delivery and before service to ensure nothing has gone outside the safe temperature zone. If temperature-sensitive food is found outside the safe temperature zone, it cannot be served to a vulnerable population like children and must be thrown away. Any questions regarding specific practices should be directed to the Rhode Island Department of Health. RIDE uses the sponsor's approved application in CNP Connect as the main source of information when observing site operations and conducting program review. Having an application that is not up to date can lead to findings, and often these findings can have a fiscal impact. Certain issues that might lead to a finding include: the sponsor did not update their application with any or all of the field trips that were occurring during the summer. The sponsor made changes to their operations, such as adjusting their serving window time, and not submitting those changes to RIDE in CNP Connect. The sponsor had multiple programs going on at a site with multiple serving locations, but did not accurately indicate this on the site application. The sponsor indicated that meals would be served on certain days. However, after a review of documentation, it was noted that meals were served on days not indicated in the sponsor's application. The sponsor's application should be an accurate reflection of the operations that are occurring at each site, including the days the site will be on a field trip, the meal times, the procedures for leftovers, how many serving locations there are, etc. All serving locations within the site should be indicated in the application. This is especially important to RIDE during a site visit, as oftentimes RIDE staff are not notified of the multiple serving locations until they arrive on site. While it is acceptable to make changes to your CNP application throughout the summer, it is important that the changes are updated in your CNP application and submitted to RIDE for approval before those changes are implemented. By a sponsor submitting their application for review to RIDE, they are attesting to the fact that all information is true and reflective of the actual operations of the site. The sponsor's approved application is the main source of operational information that RIDE has available when conducting a program review and also when conducting site visits. When it is discovered that the application does not reflect actual program operations, this could result in findings and could also have fiscal impact. This concludes RIDE's training on common review findings in the SFSP. If you have further questions or would like any clarification, please feel free to reach out to any of the contacts listed on the screen. Thank you.